Esme, not here, please. Cold water ran down the sides of the tin buckets and darkened the stone by the service door, and the sharp smell of cut lilies hung in the night air. Tobias stood in his pressed black suit under the gold lights of the charity hall, speaking through his teeth like a man trying not to be seen. Esme had come to deliver flowers, nothing more. White stock, roses, eucalyptus, the kind of stems she had been tying together before dawn for years, fingers stiff from the chill, apron damp from bucket water. But then one of Tobias's clients stepped closer, glanced at her cart by the curb, and smiled the easy smile of someone making polite conversation. "Your wife has a real gift with flowers," the man said. And Tobias, without even looking fully at her, gave the answer that would split something open between them. "Oh, no, she's just the flower woman. No one of ours." Esme did not drop the bucket. She did not cry there under the lights. She only stood still long enough to feel the words land. Some humiliations are loud, and some come softly, almost neatly, which makes them worse. Behind the glass doors, laughter rose from the gala room. Inside, crystal glimmered. Outside, the handles of the buckets bit into her palms. What Tobias's clients did not know was that those same hands had helped build his life long before he ever stepped into a glass tower and became floor manager. And that is where this story really begins. If stories about dignity, work, and second chances mean something to you, give this video a like, because what happened next, neither of them saw coming. To understand how those words could come out of Tobias's mouth so easily, you have to go back to when neither of them had much of anything. They met at a neighborhood fundraiser in a drafty church hall that smelled like coffee, wet coats, and sheet cake. Esme had brought small jars with leftover stems tucked into them. Nothing fancy, just bright scraps made beautiful by careful hands. Tobias noticed the way people softened when they stopped at her table. She noticed that he stayed behind after the event stacking chairs, not because anyone asked, but because work in front of him got done. That was how they began. No grand speech, no big moment. Just two people who recognized steadiness in each other. Later, when money was thin and rent came first, Esme started rising before dawn to work her Market Square cart. She bought flowers in bunches that other sellers overlooked, clipped away the bruised petals, changed the bucket water until her fingers went numb, and tied each little bundle with string, as if the person buying it mattered. Tobias was there in those years. He pushed the cart sometimes. He carried the folding stand. He kissed her cold forehead before his own shifts and said, "One day, this won't be so hard." And for a while, they really were a team. Then, his long hours in that glass building finally brought him what he wanted. A floor manager title, a cleaner jacket, a nameplate, a key card that opened a better elevator. Esme was proud of him, truly proud. She just didn't know that success had started teaching him a new kind of shame, and that he would soon ask her for something she could never give. At first, the change was small enough to miss. Tobias came home with his promotion letter folded in his jacket pocket, cheeks pink from excitement, the smell of office coffee still clinging to him. Esme kissed him at the door, laughed, and set out the best supper she could pull together on short notice. She even placed a hand-tied bouquet in the middle of the table, pale roses, waxflower, and a little fern, because that was her way of making an ordinary night feel like a milestone. He looked happy, grateful even. For a little while, she believed nothing between them had shifted. But success has a quiet voice when it first enters a house. It sounded like this. "Maybe don't come by the building in your apron." Or, "That square gets crowded. Have you ever thought about setting up somewhere less busy?" He never said he was ashamed in those words. He dressed it up as concern, as planning, as wanting better for both of them. Still, Esme could hear the new tone underneath. It was the tone of a man learning how to be looked at. She tried not to make too much of it. People change under pressure. Jobs do that. Titles do that. Even so, she noticed things. He stopped introducing her work with pride. He started calling it your little cart around office people. One evening, before a coworker came over, he took a framed photo off the shelf, a picture of the two of them laughing beside buckets of sunflowers, and slipped it into a drawer. Esme watched him do it. Then, a few days later, he said, too casually, "Tomorrow night, if you're selling near the hall on Grand, could you maybe choose another block?" Esme did not answer him right away. The kitchen still smelled faintly of dish soap and greenery from the stems she had trimmed that evening. Tobias was loosening his tie when he said it, like he was asking something small, something practical. Another block, another corner, as if the problem was traffic, not pride. Esme dried her hands on a towel and looked at him for a long second. "Why?" she asked. He hesitated, just enough to tell the truth before he tried to cover it. "Because my boss is hosting people there tomorrow. Some of the team, too. I just don't want things to get awkward." Awkward. That word stayed in the room like a bad smell. Not poor, tired, or overworked. Awkward. As if the cart that had helped pay bills and keep food in the house had suddenly become an inconvenience now that he had polished shoes and a better elevator. Esme felt the sting of it. But even then, she did not raise her voice. She only said, "This is where I sell best. You know that." Tobias rubbed his forehead and tried to smile. "I'm just saying, maybe for one day. You know how people are." Yes, she thought. I'm starting to. The next morning, long before sunrise turned the sky silver, Esme was back where she belonged. Buckets clinked softly. Damp newspaper stuck to her fingers. The air smelled of rain on stone and fresh-cut stems. She tied ribbon around a small bundle of pink carnations while the square slowly woke around her. Then, just after lunch, her phone rang. A woman's voice, rushed and breathless, said, "I was given your name at the hall. I need extra flowers delivered tonight, and I need them fast." That call came from the charity hall itself. The woman on the line sounded like she was walking fast in heels. Her voice echoed, doors opening and shutting behind her. A delivery had fallen short. A few tables were still bare. Could Esme bring whatever she had left? Quickly? She looked down at the buckets around her, at the roses opening just enough, the green stems slick in her hands, and said yes before she could think too much about where she was going. By early evening, she was unloading flowers near the side entrance Tobias had hoped she would avoid. The air smelled of polished stone, car exhaust, and wet leaves. Inside, staff hurried past with trays and folded linens. Esme kept her head down and her hands moving. She had no interest in causing a scene. She was there to do a job well, the same way she always did it. Then she heard Tobias's voice, smooth, practiced. He was speaking with two clients just beyond a tall arrangement of branches and white blooms. One of them glanced toward the buckets and said, almost warmly, "I didn't know your family was behind the flowers tonight." There was the smallest pause. And then Tobias answered, easy as breathing, "Oh, no. She's just the flower woman. No one of ours." Esme went still. The ribbon in her hand tightened against her fingers. She could hear laughter from the ballroom, silverware clinking, shoes crossing the marble. Everything kept moving, as if nothing had happened. But something had. And she was not the only one who heard it. A woman in a camel coat standing by the service desk turned toward Esme, stared at the half-finished bouquets in her buckets, and kept staring. The woman in the camel coat waited until Tobias and his clients moved on. Then she stepped closer to Esme's buckets, with the sharp attention of someone who knew how to look at work. She touched nothing. She only leaned in, studying the roses, the trailing greens, the way each stem had been grouped with intention instead of fuss. "Did you make these?" she asked. Esme nodded once. Her throat still felt tight. "I'm Claire," the woman said. "I plan weddings and events. And those—" She glanced toward the ballroom, where Esme's flowers had already softened the room. "Those don't look like filler work." Esme almost laughed at that, because it was the first honest thing anyone had said to her all evening. She finished placing the last bucket and told Claire she needed to go. There would be no hallway argument, no pleading explanation. She had heard enough. At home, Tobias was already there, jacket off, sleeves rolled, acting as if the evening could still be managed with the right words. He started with, "Look, it sounded worse than it was." Esme set her keys down carefully. "No," she said. "It sounded exactly like what you meant." The room fell quiet except for the hum of the refrigerator. Tobias rubbed his face and spoke about pressure, about clients, about how people in his position notice appearances. He said she could keep selling flowers, just not like that. Not in the open, not from the square, not where people might connect her to him. Esme looked at him then, really looked, and understood something painful. He was asking her to be smaller so he could feel bigger. The next Saturday, before she had fully decided what to do with that truth, Claire came back to the cart in person, breathless, pale, and desperate. Her florist had just quit. She needed every flower Esme had. Claire was not asking for pretty. She was asking for rescue. Her hair had come loose. Her phone kept buzzing in her hand, and panic sat right under her careful voice. A bride was dressing. Guests were already arriving. The florist she had hired had walked out after a supply mess and never came back. "I need bouquets, table pieces, anything that can make the room feel finished," she said. "Can you do that?" Esme looked at the flowers on her cart, at the stems she had sorted before sunrise, at the bucket she knew by feel better than most people knew their own desk drawers. She did not promise magic. She asked the questions that mattered. How many tables? What colors? What time was the ceremony? What containers were already at the venue? Claire stared at her for half a beat, then exhaled like someone who had finally found the right person. Within minutes, the whole Market Square cart was being loaded into Claire's van. The venue kitchen smelled of coffee, frosting, and damp cardboard. Esme worked at a stainless steel prep table while staff rushed around her. She stripped leaves, wired weak stems, split bunches so they looked fuller, and turned panic into order, one arrangement at a time. A hand-tied bouquet for the bride, softer clusters for the tables, greenery where money was thin, balance where chaos had been. By the time the first guests took their seats, the room looked intentional, warm, loved. Claire watched people stop and whisper over the flowers. Then, near the cake table, a woman in pearls asked, "Who designed these?" Claire turned toward Esme, and in that moment, Tobias walked in through the side doors and saw exactly where she was standing. Tobias stopped just inside the service entrance. He was still wearing his work badge on a dark ribbon, and for a second, he looked like a man who had opened the wrong door. On one side of the room were people he wanted to impress. On the other was Esme, sleeves damp, a loose strand of hair stuck to her cheek, standing beside arrangements that had just saved the entire wedding. Claire did not know any of their history, so she answered the woman in pearls plainly. "She did," Claire said. "Esme." The woman smiled at Esme with the kind of respect that does not need polishing. "They're beautiful," she said. "They feel alive." That word stayed with Esme. Tobias did not come over. He only watched from a distance, caught in that uncomfortable place between recognition and pride. Maybe he wanted to say something. Maybe he did not know how. But the evening no longer belonged to him. It belonged to the work. To the stems she had rescued, to the room she had steadied, to the quiet authority of hands that knew what to do under pressure. Claire asked for Esme's number before the night was over. And then, because event people talk, one saved wedding turned into another call, then another. A retirement supper in a private hall, a small engagement party with candlelight and pale roses, a memorial where the family asked for flowers that felt gentle instead of grand. By the end of the month, every one of those bookings had come because someone had seen her work and remembered how it made a room feel. Esme was still waking before dawn, still hauling buckets, still tying blooms by hand. But now, on certain evenings, she was staying up later at the kitchen table with Claire's notes spread out in front of her, realizing the cart might not be the whole story anymore. Then her daughter Lena came by, looked at the growing stack of orders, and said, "Mom, I think you need more than a cart now." Lena was right. She stood in Esme's kitchen with her coat still on, one hand around a mug of tea, the other flipping through order slips spread across the table. The room smelled of stems, pencil shavings, and the onion soup Esme had forgotten on low heat. What had once been a few scribbled names on scrap paper was now a real stack of requests, each one needing timing, containers, color notes, delivery windows. The work was growing faster than the space around it. "Mom, this can't all happen between the sink and the stove," Lena said gently. Esme smiled, tired but a little stunned by her own life. Lena was grown now, with her own eye for shape and color, sharper in some ways than Esme's. She noticed things that mattered in a different way: spacing, branding, photos, how one clean image could bring 3 more calls. Esme knew flowers in her hands. Lena knew how to help the world see them. So they found a narrow back room behind a bakery to use as a tiny studio. It was not glamorous. The floor tilted, the walls needed paint, the air carried sugar and yeast from next door. But it had a work table, a shelf for ribbon, and enough room to sort buckets without bumping into the refrigerator. Esme kept the square going in the mornings and used the little room later for event work. Lena came after her own job and stayed until late, sleeves rolled, helping build samples and write invoices. If you're listening and you've ever watched someone turn plain hard work into something lasting, you know how quietly those changes begin. Then, one afternoon, while Lena was trimming stems, Tobias sent a message for the first time in weeks. It only said, "I heard things are going well. Maybe we should talk." And almost at that same moment, Claire called with a very different kind of question. Claire's question had nothing to do with the square and everything to do with scale. She did not even bother with small talk. "Esme, are you sitting down?" she asked. In the background, Esme could hear paper shuffling, heels on concrete, a door swinging shut. A coordinator from the Opera House saw the memorial work from last week. Their gala florist backed out of a smaller donor event, and they need someone to pitch a replacement look by Monday. For a second, the little studio behind the bakery felt too small to breathe in. Lena stopped trimming stems and looked up at once. The room smelled of damp leaves and sweet bread from next door. Esme held the phone tighter. The Opera House was the kind of place people like Tobias talked about, with lowered voices and polished manners. It was not market work. It was not even wedding work. It was a room full of people trained to notice every detail. Lena grinned before Esme could answer. "Tell her yes." Esme laughed once, out of nerves more than confidence. "Claire, that's bigger than anything I've done." "I know," Claire said. "That's why I'm calling you." After the call, Tobias's message still sat on the screen. "Maybe we should talk." Esme looked at it, then turned the phone face down on the table. Wrong timing. Some conversations arrive after the moment that could have changed them. That whole weekend, mother and daughter worked late under the buzz of a single overhead light. Sample ribbons, stem counts, color boards, pricing, delivery windows. By Sunday night, tired and cold, they had built a proposal out of buckets, courage, and borrowed vases. Then Monday morning brought one more surprise. The coordinator reviewing the pitch said she knew Tobias by name. The moment Tobias's name came up, Lena looked over at her mother. Some names carry a draft with them, even when the room is warm. The coordinator, a brisk woman with silver glasses and a pencil tucked behind one ear, was flipping through the proposal when she said it. You wouldn't happen to be connected to Tobias Hale, would you? He helps with sponsor logistics on some of our larger evenings. Esme kept her face still. The paper in her hand gave a faint, dry crackle. Yes, she said. We know each other. The coordinator nodded, not sensing the weight in that answer, and went on asking about STEM substitutions, transport timing, and whether Esme could scale from sample work to a full room if needed. And that, more than anything, steadied her. The flowers still came first. The work. So Esme spoke plainly, about what held under heat, about what bruised in transit, about why guests noticed balance before they noticed expense. Lena added notes about setup windows and branding photos. Together, they sounded like what they had become. Not a woman with a cart asking for a chance, but a real business taking shape in front of its own eyes. That afternoon, the trial booking came through. Not the full grand gala yet, but a donor evening in one wing of the Opera House. It was enough to change everything. The studio behind the bakery no longer made sense. Buckets were crowding the walls. Deliveries needed proper storage. Lena started sketching plans for a small cold room workshop. And for the first time, Esme let herself imagine a place that smelled not of borrowed space, but of her own work. Then, just as she was locking up for the night, Tobias was waiting by the back door. And he did not look like a man coming to congratulate her. Esme almost kept walking. The alley behind the bakery was cold and smelled of wet brick, yeast, and crushed leaves underfoot. Tobias stood with his hands in his coat pockets, shoulders drawn in, like a man who had rehearsed several versions of himself and trusted none of them. The street lamp caught the tiredness in his face before it caught anything else. I'm not here to make trouble, he said. Esme set down the box she was carrying. Then say what you came to say. For once, he did not start with excuses. No talk about pressure or optics or how people in his position think. He looked past her into the little studio crowded with buckets and ribbon and half-finished samples, and something in him seemed to give way. I was wrong, he said quietly. That night, and before that too. The words hung there between them, small but real. He told her he had heard about the Opera House trial through work channels before he heard it from anyone else. He had watched people speak about her flowers with respect, the same people he once tried to impress by pretending she had nothing to do with him, and that had forced him to see himself more clearly than he liked. Esme listened, arms folded against the cold. When he offered to help, contacts, introductions, whatever she needed, she shook her head. I'm not building this to prove something to you, she said, and I'm not building it through you either. He nodded, and that hurt him more than anger would have. Before he left, Tobias said one last thing. They're talking about expanding that donor event into the full Opera House gala, and if that happens, I'll be there. Esme watched him go, then turned back inside. 2 mornings later, the call came. Not the trial, not a side room. The full gala contract was hers. After that call, the pace of Esme's life changed all over again. The new cold room workshop came together fast, solid. A cleaned-out unit with humming refrigeration, metal shelves, a broad prep table, and enough space for buckets lined in neat rows instead of crowding every corner. The air inside was cool and damp, rich with greenery and fresh stems. Lena moved through it like she belonged there, learning how to condition flowers, map out installations, and direct helpers without wasting a step. What had once been one woman and a cart was now a crew. And still, Esme did not let the work lose its soul. The same care that had gone into a single bunch for someone walking through the square now went into towering entry pieces, stair garlands, and table flowers for the Opera House gala. She checked every ribbon, every water source, every backup box. Lena handled schedules. Claire helped manage the event side. Assistants loaded vans before sunrise, the doors thudding shut in the dark. On gala day, the opera house smelled of polished wood, wax, and chilled air from old stone halls. Esme stood beneath the grand staircase with clippers in one pocket and pins in the other, making last-second adjustments while guests had not yet arrived. Above her, blooms climbed the banister, like soft color moving upward through the building itself. Across the entrance floor, Tobias was already there with the sponsor team. He saw people stop and stare at the flowers before they even checked their coats. He heard the compliments. He heard Esme's name. This time, nobody said just. Nobody needed to. The work had answered for itself. Then, just before the doors opened fully, Tobias walked toward her through the half-lit lobby and said, almost under his breath, "Esme, could we talk now?" Esme looked at Tobias for only a moment before she went back to work. Just clear. Around them, the lobby was waking into its grandest self. Polished floors catching the light, staff murmuring into headsets, the scent of roses and greenery rising through the old building. Tobias stood there in his suit, waiting like a man who finally understood that regret does not turn back time. When she finished pinning a loose spray near the staircase, she walked over. He started to speak, then stopped. Maybe he heard in the room what she had heard long before him, that her name now moved ahead of her on its own. "I should have been proud from the start," he said. Esme nodded once. "Maybe," she answered. Then she reached to the tray beside her, lifted one stem from the extra boutonnieres, a deep ivory bloom with a green throat, and pinned it to his lapel with steady hands. It was grace, given without reopening the door. "You can still admire what grows," she said softly, "even if you were the one who once stood in its shade." Then she stepped back, checked the flower once to make sure it sat straight, and turned toward Lena, Claire, and the waiting crew. There were guests to welcome, tables to watch, candles to clear around the lower arrangements. The evening needed her fully, and that was where she belonged. Later, after the last donor had gone home and the halls fell quiet, Esme stood alone a second in the cold room workshop. On one shelf sat an old tin bucket from the square, cleaned but still dented. Fresh stems rested inside it, upright and ready for morning. Some things do not outgrow their beginnings. They carry them forward. If this story stayed with you, leave a like and join the channel. And if you know someone who works with honest hands, send this their way.